I move out of my home and my marriage of 20 plus years, and I was at the most vulnerable place of my existence. I had been volunteering at an agency that worked with people who did not have homes, and they hired me. I ended up getting promoted to create a program for employment for people experiencing homelessness. I had no idea what I was doing, zero, and I had never spent a day homeless in my life.
Welcome to Grief Heals, the podcast that explores how grief heals. Join us as we consider how grief invites love within ourselves, our communities, our world, our histories, and how it is that grief heals. I'm Lisa Michelle Zega here with Eric Simpson.
I'm very excited to announce that we start another healing circle. This is an online experience. It's Tuesday evenings, PST. It starts at 5:30 p.m. It goes until 7 p.m. Together, we experience just a gentle rhythm of embracing silence, of being with poetry, of being with our own hearts. Like I hold the space open with my co-host, Steve, and we just are together embracing our shared humanity. So you are invited. The January 16th Healing Circle is now going to be on February 6th. So I'll be saying more about that, but just for now, it's being postponed until February 6th.
I know that during our last episode, you talked about the television show on Apple TV called The Crowded Room, which I saw a few months ago and you saw recently with your coworker.
Mm-hmm. I introduced it to her. So I had seen it before and I was like, oh, I felt compelled to have her watch it and she was up for it. So we did that together.
It's written by the guy that wrote Flowers for Algernon. I believe the book is a lot different than the television show. The television show just sort of takes the basic premise of the book and goes its own way. But the book was called The Minds of Billy Milligan. And The Crowded Room is about a young man who has dissociative identity disorder, which back then was not in the DSM manual, and neither was multiple personality disorder. And so when he goes to court, they're labeling him as a deviant and as a criminal and not as somebody who could have these types of issues. And there's one person who advocates for him. Maybe you can say more about that.
Yeah, well, it really struck me in terms of its relationship to Grief Heals, because one of the things that you said that has stuck with me so powerfully is that love is attention. You know, the way it's portrayed in the television show is that this therapist, who is a professor, gets called in because there's something different about the person who's been arrested. She's just really with him and asking questions and getting curious and paying attention. And it's in that process that she recognizes that he presents himself differently at different times. There's this one scene where she ends up, working alongside his defense lawyer. And I don't remember the conversation that precedes, but he says, please don't tell me you're going to say, all we need is love. And she pauses and basically says, yeah, it's kind of true. And as it turns out, this child, who's now an adult and has shot a gun in a public place, is deeply wounded and has experienced sexual molestation from very early on and repeated for a long time. And what it brought up to me, what I love is that in my thinking, this is all of our experience. All of us fragment in certain ways. All of us are seeking to survive. We're doing based on the resources made available to us, what we've absorbed through our childhood caregivers, even in our bodies through our ancestry, and the demands, the hardships in our environment, all of us, what we're thinking and what we're doing makes sense if you know that triangle, which actually I want to say it's Albert Banderos, and the cognitive framework is what I'm referring to. And as I've spent more time with the cognitive framework and let it work me, if you will, I don't know if I'm representing it the way that the man that came up with this would represent it, but I see it like the house that we're all in. And if you know what I've absorbed and you know the resources I've had or have, and you know the demands of my environment, everything I think and everything I do will make perfect sense. And I think that's true of all of us. We're all seeking to stay safe. So we're just trying to survive. I don't care what it is, it all makes sense if you know those things. And I still, to integrate, to come back together within myself, love is required.
I'm thinking about Abraham Maslow and humanistic psychology, and that he didn't treat people a certain way according to some sort of heuristic where you say, well, this person suffers from this condition, therefore they're going to always act this way as though it's been reified. And that's sort of the problem within the mental health industry is we reify terms that are merely describing behavior. And there are plenty of people who have written about this who are therapists or psychiatrists. James Hillman wrote a whole book on how we have, decades of therapeutic psychology and we're worse off than we were before. I think one of the possible reasons for that is that we tend not to engage with other people as they are, but according to what kind of model we put them in within our minds.
The layman's terms that are coming to my mind in reference to what you were sharing, it's like once I've labeled you, that's the lens I'm looking at you through. And then there's so much of you that I'm not seeing. There's this exercise I did recently in a training room, and we were asked to identify every shade of, let's say it was blue, that we could see in the room. And so we're, busily counting shades of blue, and then, okay, now close your eyes, open your eyes, and everyone call out how many shades of red you noticed. I've since done this several times in workshops, including the one that I did last week. And I remember one person saying, "But you didn't ask us to look for red." And the whole thing is we see what we're looking for,
Right.
right? So in the crowded room, what people saw was someone who was nuts. What people saw was someone who just wanted to get away with whatever behavior and have someone to blame. It's just fascinating to me that how much that's what we do on automatic,
Mm-hmm.
right? And and then the intentionality of interrupting the automatic so that we can notice and be with.
Well, and part of that, I think, is entering into our shared grief because we've experienced grief and they have experienced grief, and that becomes sort of the locus of our shared humanity with each other.
That it's, I present Ruby Payne's work, which is the Bridges Out of Poverty work. And there's a slide on one of the presentations that basically says, if you've come here to help me, you can leave,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you've come here recognizing that my humanity is your humanity, then maybe we can have a conversation. I think I've misquoted it a little bit, but there's something in that vein. And that I'm tracing back my own history, Eric. When I was mid 40s, I move out of my home and my marriage of 20 plus years, 23, I think it was. And I was at the most vulnerable place of my existence. I had been volunteering at an agency that worked with people who did not have homes, and they hired me. My job, I ended up getting promoted to create a program for employment for people experiencing homelessness. I had no idea what I was doing, zero, and I had never spent a day homeless in my life. What I was suffering, and I was acutely aware of my pain. The loss of my boys broke me open in a way that I was raw. So when I was with them, whomever it was I was working with, I was with them just as fellow human who the only reason I was not experiencing their situation was because I had relationship capital. And I showed up on a friend's doorstep and said, "Hey, can I crash here for a couple of weeks?" And that couple of weeks became 2 years, and I lived there paying $200 a month. The reason I'm telling you that story and how it connects to the crowded room or the other, avenues we've taken is I was just there as human. People were willing to ride with me and just see what it was like, recognize I was going to make mistakes along the way. My coworkers and the families that I was able to get into housing and then help with employment, they trusted me as just a fellow human.
Mhm.
And that's actually the catalyst, at least in my awareness, of what emerged in me around grief being a healing agent, an agent that connects us to shared humanity. Where you were talking about the premise of that story, and then I said, this is the premise of all of us. We all are seeking to stay safe. We all fragment from ourselves in certain kind of ways and bringing love to the places of our pain and the source of our suffering that caused us to pull away from ourselves in the first place. Like, this is what's needed to integrate, not just within myself, but within a relationship and then within a society.
It seems to me like if I heard you saying that, if I was in a period of extreme grief, I would think to myself, "Well, how do I do that? How do I bring love to those places?" I mean, I'd probably be in all this pain because I've experienced this before, pain and grief. And there's maybe a disconnect between realizing or recognizing that that is how love
Yeah.
comes. And so simply by experiencing
Yeah.
my grief,
Like slowing down to it and allowing it to be there
right?
without apology or pushing it away. Yeah, maybe that's the thing, Eric. See, love comes automatically. And it's not because I want to be so careful because I'm not seeking to villainize the person who is suffering. We have literally been taught to move away from our grief and not attend to it, attune to it, or slow down to allow it.
Mhm.
We are trained to apologize for it, try to fix it, try to, right? Like, that's why people say the most god awful things, like, well, you'll meet somebody new.
Mhm.
Well, at least you have other kids. Well, I'm this, they're
Right.
real statements.
Mhm. Yeah.
They often start with at least, which immediately is minimizing
Or,
rather than allowing.
or people will say, compare your suffering with somebody who, well, they lost their whole home and all their kids and their dog,
Right.
you know.
Like when your home burned down, right?
Right.
I can imagine someone saying, well, what they lost,
Mhm.
and making that comparison as if the heart works that way,
Right.
as if the heart's like, oh, cool. Oh, someone else suffered more, then I'm good. It's cool, bro. That is really genuinely not the way that we're designed. So, the very first thing, if somebody is in their grief, one, they're not interested in healing the world, most likely. Their world is cracked open and feels perhaps irredeemable in some kind of way. Often I work with people who feel guilty, even we talked about this in one of the episodes, being with a sunrise or any kind of beauty, as if I'm not allowed to experience beauty anymore because I need to honor this loss and feel terrible. It's a both and. We're complex people. And I would simply say, you get to be however you are. People are afraid that that the grief will swallow, and like we've all been in contact with people that seem to, that get judged for wallowing or
Mhm.
never healing or 30 years later and still talking with bitterness about something that happened to them. That is often what we're witnessing is actually ungrieved grief,
Right.
something that was complained about and not allowed to be felt, to be held as if we're wrong or bad. I'm in relationship with someone who messaged me this morning and said, I'm just recognizing that I'm going to be alone, whose husband is in a long-term care facility. I have permission, by the way. She's given me permission to share pieces of her story and thinks that she's wrong for being devastated. So ingrained is it, so unfamiliar is it to allow that we can experience something that feels devastating and just allow that to be and not make ourselves wrong or bad for it. We're naturally going to make ourselves wrong or bad often. And then we
Right.
get to release that, like we talked about in one of the episodes of just like, all right, notice that's going on. Notice that the pain is there and seek to come back to the present moment as best you can. Notice your butt in the chair, your feet on the ground, right? I'm in this room. I'm looking at this lamp, that sort of thing.
And so in bringing that around to the way that we treat people who are abject, such as a person who's been to prison or a person like the character in A Crowded Room, you seem to be saying we can approach such people as fully human through our own grief,
Yeah.
recognizing their grief as well. And it's not like we're saying you're going to totally trust every person that you meet,
No.
but recognizing each person that we meet as genuinely human as we are,
Yes.
and having experiences similar to experiences that we have, though there may be variation in the way that it plays out depending on who you are. But
Yes.
that's a common ground for sharing our humanity with each other, and as such, it is a definition of the type of love that the therapist
Showed
character,
in the,
right?
as we are rounding the corner, the thing that I want to share. So prior to my boys and that when I shared that my heart was broke open in ways that I had not experienced, I had a whole history of unloved losses, unwitnessed grief, right? Unmetabolized suffering. I was that person coming in to advise, fix, or save other humans. I was not present to my own suffering, and I did a lot of harm, most notably as a mother. I was not trustworthy, not because I didn't want to be a good mom, not because I didn't have really great things to say. There are people that still to this day learned so much from me back then, and I'm abhorred by it. Like it freaks me out because I was not really attuned to my humanity or theirs. And in that way, Eric, I do not think I was trustworthy. I could not have been in the space that I was in last week without doing harm as the woman I was then. The way that my own suffering opened me to the depths of my human is what makes me, to the extent that I'm a safe human doing good in the world, to whatever extent that is, that has come not from avoiding my grief, but from engaging it and embracing it.
You've been listening to Grief Heals with your host, Lisa Michelle Zega. The podcast is produced by me, Eric Simpson, in association with Jump Up and Down Productions. We would love it if you would join us. Expand the conversation about grief. If you want to reach Lisa, she can be reached at her website, legitU.com. That's LEGITYOU.com. Her email is lisamichelle@legitU.com. You can reach me at litryfella@gmail.com. That's LITRYFELLA. Please tell a friend about us. Hit the like button. Share the podcast on social media. Until next time, Lisa and I are grateful to you. Thank you for your attention. This has been a Jump Up and Down production.